I never thought my own son would look me in the eyes and say those words. Dad, you're too old to be useful in the business anymore. The board agrees. My name is Frank Sullivan, and at 63, I found myself standing in the office I'd built from nothing, hearing my son Michael tell me I was obsolete. I remember that day with perfect clarity. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds of the corner office on the 32nd floor of Sullivan Logistics headquarters in downtown Chicago. The city sprawled beneath us, a testament to what I'd achieved over 4 decades of backbreaking work. Outside that window were 3 warehouses, 2 distribution centers, and a fleet of 67 trucks that I'd built from a single beat-up delivery van and a dream. The shareholders' meeting was unanimous, Michael continued, leaning against my mahogany desk, the same desk where I'd signed his first college tuition check. It's time for new blood, Dad. The company needs to evolve. I felt the familiar weight of my wedding ring as I gripped the armrest of my chair. Catherine would have known exactly what to say in this moment. She always did. But cancer had taken her 3 years earlier, leaving me alone to face our son, who now wore an expensive suit and a stranger's cold eyes. I see, I said, keeping my voice level. 40 years of negotiating contracts had taught me never to show weakness. And what exactly does that mean for me? Michael smiled, that practiced, corporate smile he'd developed after his MBA at Wharton. Nothing like the gap-toothed grin of the boy who used to beg me for piggyback rides around our first small house in Oak Park. We're not putting you out to pasture completely, he said, as if offering a generous concession. We've created a special position for you. Senior consultant. You'll maintain your health benefits, a reduced salary, and flexible duties. What kind of duties? I asked, though something in his tone made my stomach tighten. To start with, I need a driver. He checked his Rolex, the one I'd given him when he graduated business school. My lease on the Bentley starts next week, but I can't waste time sitting in traffic when I could be making calls. You know the city better than anyone. You'll drive me to meetings, wait, and drive me back. No stress, no responsibility. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It never came. My son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, whose broken arm I'd held in the ER at 2 a.m., who I put through the best schools by working 16-hour days, was demoting me to a chauffeur. The board feels it's best if we announce your retirement at the quarterly meeting next month, he continued, checking something on his phone. We'll give you the gold watch, the standing ovation, all that. Good optics. I thought about the company Christmas parties in our garage when we had just 3 employees. About the second mortgage I took on our house to make payroll during the recession of '08. About teaching Michael the business from the ground up, hoping he'd carry on what I'd built with the same values. Instead of anger, a strange calm settled over me. I nodded slowly, my mind already beginning to work in ways it hadn't needed to in years. I understand, I said finally. When do I start? Michael looked surprised, he'd expected resistance. Monday. 8 sharp. My condo in River North. I stood and extended my hand. He shook it, relieved. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, Dad. It's just business. Nothing personal. I smiled. The same smile I'd used when ruthless competitors thought they had me cornered 30 years ago. Of course. Just business. That evening, I sat alone in the kitchen of my house in Lincoln Park. It was too big for one person, but Catherine and I had bought it when Sullivan Logistics landed our first $1 million contract. She'd filled it with warmth and life. Now it echoed with silence. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon and opened my laptop. The Sullivan Logistics employee database was still accessible with my credentials. For now. I began to read, to search, to plan. By the time the glass was empty, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Monday morning, I arrived at Michael's luxury high-rise at 7:45 a.m. The Bentley gleamed in the morning light as the valet brought it around. Michael emerged from the lobby at 8:10, not apologizing for being late. Morning, "Dad," he said, sliding into the back seat without looking up from his phone. "We've got a meeting with Westlake Distribution at 9. Then lunch with the bank. Then the law firm at 2. "Got it," I said, adjusting the mirror. Our eyes didn't meet. I pulled into Chicago morning traffic, just another old man serving someone more important. But as I drove, I noticed things. I listened. And I smiled. Because while Michael saw an old man past his prime, I saw the beginning of justice. It would take time. Patience. But I had plenty of both. And something Michael had forgotten, I hadn't built an empire by being useful. I'd built it by being underestimated. For 2 weeks, I played my role perfectly. I arrived early each morning at Michael's condo, navigated Chicago traffic with the expertise of someone who'd driven its streets for decades, and waited patiently outside gleaming office buildings while my son conducted the business I'd created. "Take us to Gibson's for lunch," Michael instructed one Wednesday, not looking up from his phone as he settled into the back seat. "I'm meeting with James Westlake." James Westlake. My mind immediately recalled the distribution contract we'd negotiated 3 years ago, $4.2 million annually, set to renew in 6 months. A vital piece of Sullivan Logistics' revenue stream. "Of course," I replied, pulling into traffic. In the rearview mirror, I could see Michael straightening his tie, rehearsing expressions. He'd always been deliberate that way, calculating each interaction for maximum advantage. As I drove, I listened to him make calls, speaking loudly as if I were just another piece of the car's machinery. "The old man's out of the picture now," he told someone. "We can finally modernize operations." "Yeah, he's actually driving me around now, if you can believe it." A laugh. "Keeps him busy, you know? Better than a retirement home." I kept my eyes on the road, my face neutral. Just another day in my new role as the family chauffeur. Gibson's Steakhouse bustled with Chicago's business elite when we arrived. I opened Michael's door, and he strode inside without a backward glance. "I'll call when I'm done," he said, already focused on the meeting ahead. Instead of driving to a coffee shop to wait, I parked where I could see the restaurant entrance and took out my phone. Catherine had always said I was too stubborn to embrace technology, but necessity is a powerful teacher. I opened the voice recorder app I'd installed and checked the Bluetooth connection to the small device I'd placed under the rear seat of the Bentley that morning. 2 hours later, my phone pinged with a text from Michael, out front in 10. I pulled up just as he emerged with James Westlake, a barrel-chested man with a booming laugh who'd been one of my most trusted business partners. James spotted me behind the wheel and did a double take. "Frank? What the hell?" He looked between me and Michael in confusion. "Dad's helping out with some driving," Michael said smoothly. "Semi-retirement arrangement. You know how it is, keeps him active." James frowned. "But you're..." "Just happy to be useful," I interrupted, meeting James' eyes with a look that stopped him short. "Good to see you, James." Something passed between us. 40 years of business relationships created a language of their own. James nodded slowly, his expression changing from confusion to something more contemplative. "Right. Well." He clapped Michael on the shoulder with less enthusiasm than before. "Think about what I said about those shipping rates. Not sure we can renew at the proposed increase." As James walked away, I caught the flicker of concern on Michael's face. The Westlake contract was crucial, and James' tone had shifted. Michael slid into the back seat, immediately making calls to his new CFO, a young man named Tyler who'd been with the company just 8 months. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and listened to the recording from lunch. Michael and James discussing shipping rates, contract terms, and then, between us, James, we're streamlining operations. Cutting the deadweight my father refused to trim. The old guard, the loyalty hires, the manual systems, all of it's going. We'll be leaner, more profitable. Your father built those relationships for a reason, Michael, James' voice, cautious. Some of those loyalty hires are why we do business with you. Trust me, once you see the new numbers, you won't care about a few terminations. We're already moving certain operations offshore. The board's fully behind it. Offshore. The word landed like a stone in my stomach. Sullivan Logistics had always prided itself on American operations, American jobs. It was one of our selling points with clients like Westlake. I opened my laptop and logged into the company system using the credentials of Marge Donovan, my executive assistant for 27 years. Another loyalty hire who'd been let go the week after my retirement. She'd called me in tears, worried about her mortgage with only a meager severance. I'd taken care of it quietly, and in return, she'd shared her login before IT deactivated it. Digging through recent executive communications, I found what I was looking for: proposals for outsourcing warehouse operations to facilities in Mexico and the Philippines, detailed plans for terminating 43% of our workforce, and projections showing how these cuts would boost short-term profits and executive bonuses while decimating the company's long-term stability. My jaw tightened. This wasn't business evolution. This was corporate strip mining. The next morning, as I drove Michael to a meeting with our banking partners, I noticed dark circles under his eyes. The Westlake conversation had clearly troubled him. Rough night? I asked mildly. He glanced up, surprised I'd initiated conversation. Just business concerns. Nothing for you to worry about. The Westlake contract? I kept my tone casual. His eyes narrowed. You shouldn't be listening to my conversations. Hard not to when you're talking in the car. I met his gaze in the rearview mirror. I built that relationship with James, you know. His father and I started our companies the same year. That was then, Dad. Business is different now. Relationships don't matter like they used to. I nodded thoughtfully. Maybe you're right. The seeds were planted. Now I just had to water them carefully and wait for them to grow. That evening, I made a call from my home landline, the one I knew wasn't monitored by Sullivan Logistics IT. James? It's Frank Sullivan. I was hoping we could meet. Just you and me. There are some things you should know. James Westlake and I met at a small diner in Bridgeport, far from the downtown high-rises and expense-account restaurants. It was the kind of place where the coffee came in thick ceramic mugs and the waitresses called you hon regardless of your net worth. You look good, Frank, James said as he slid into the booth across from me. His eyes told a different story: concern, confusion. But I gotta say, seeing you behind the wheel of that Bentley yesterday was a shock. I wrapped my weathered hands around my coffee mug. Not exactly how I planned to spend my golden years. What's really going on? Michael gave me some song and dance about a consulting role, but I'd known you too long. The waitress refilled our coffees. When she'd moved away, I leaned forward. The board voted me out. Michael led the charge. I'm being retired at the quarterly meeting next month. James let out a low whistle. Your own company? Your own son? Jesus, Frank. It gets worse. I pulled out my phone and played some of the recordings I'd made. Michael discussing the offshore transitions, the planned layoffs, the strategy to pump up short-term numbers for a potential sale. James' face darkened as he listened. This isn't what we agreed to in our contract. We partnered with Sullivan because you guaranteed American operations, union drivers. My clients expect that. I know. And I'm sorry. I turned off the recording. I built that company on relationships and quality. On my word. Now it seems my word doesn't matter anymore. What are you going to do? I took a sip of coffee. That depends. How much of the real Sullivan Logistics business practices do your contracts specify? James raised an eyebrow, then slowly smiled. Every damn detail, Frank. You know I don't trust handshake agreements, even with you. We've got service levels, staffing requirements, domestic operations clauses, all of it. Now it was my turn to smile. That's what I was counting on. Over the next hour, we formulated a plan. James would request an audit of Sullivan Logistics operations, his right under their contract. He'd specifically look for compliance with the Domestic Operations Clause. Meanwhile, I would continue gathering evidence of Michael's plans. You know this could tank the company, James said as we prepared to leave. Your company? I nodded gravely. It stopped being my company the moment they decided to betray everything it stood for. What Michael's planning will destroy it anyway, just slowly, painfully, with hundreds of families caught in the crossfire. And what about you? What do you get out of this? I stared out the window at the Chicago skyline in the distance. The chance to rebuild something better from the ashes. And to teach my son the lesson I apparently failed to instill: actions have consequences. As I drove Michael to meetings over the next few days, I noted his increasing agitation. Phone calls became more heated, his tone more desperate. The Westlake audit request had clearly thrown a wrench into his plans. No, we can't postpone the Philippines transition, he snapped into his phone as we drove to a lunch meeting. The board is expecting those cost savings this quarter. Stall the audit team. Tell them systems are down or whatever. When we reached the restaurant, he was so preoccupied he left his tablet on the seat. I seized the opportunity, using the password I'd seen him enter countless times to access his email. Quickly, I forwarded several incriminating messages to my personal account, detailed plans for the offshore transition, communications with board members about my forced retirement, and most damning, discussions about falsifying compliance reports for the Westlake audit. That night, I made another call, this time to Eduardo Vasquez, the head of the Warehouse Workers Union. I'd negotiated fairly with Eduardo for 15 years, even during tough financial times. We'd always found solutions that respected the workers while keeping the business viable. I need to show you something, Eduardo, I said after explaining my situation. Michael's planning to close the Chicago warehouses. 300 jobs, gone. We met the next morning at his office. His face grew thunderous as I showed him the evidence. This violates our labor agreement, he said, jaw tight. We've got another 2 years on our contract. I know. And I suspect he's planning to claim financial hardship to break it. Eduardo shook his head. Not if I can help it. We'll file for an injunction the moment they announce anything. The pieces were falling into place. But I needed more. My opportunity came when Michael instructed me to drive him to the law firm handling Sullivan Logistics legal affairs. As usual, he treated me like furniture, not bothering to ask me to wait elsewhere while he discussed sensitive matters with his counsel in the back seat. We need to find a way around these contract obligations, he told his lawyer, unaware that my phone was recording every word. Westlake's audit is going to uncover the offshore plans before we're ready to announce them. That's problematic, the lawyer replied. The contracts are fairly ironclad. Frank was always meticulous about the legal details. I suppressed a smile. Yes, I certainly was. There must be a loophole, Michael insisted. What about force majeure? You'd need an actual catastrophic event, not just a business decision to cut costs. Then create one, Michael snapped. That's what I pay you for. The lawyer's uncomfortable silence spoke volumes. By week 3 of my chauffeur duties, the noose was tightening around Michael's plans. Westlake's audit team had requested extensive documentation. The union was asking pointed questions about warehouse staffing levels. Board members were calling with concerns about the sudden scrutiny. And still, Michael saw only an old man behind the wheel, invisible, harmless. Take me home, he ordered late Friday afternoon, loosening his tie after a particularly tense meeting. It's been a hell of a week. Problems with the business? I asked innocently. He snorted. Nothing I can't handle. Just regulatory headaches, supplier issues. The usual. Anything I can help with? I do have some experience in these matters. For a moment, something like shame flickered across his face. Then his expression hardened. No offense, Dad, but business has evolved since your day. Modern problems require modern solutions. Of course, I replied mildly. I'm just the driver. But as I navigated through Chicago's Friday traffic, I was anything but just the driver. I was the architect of the reckoning that was about to come. And Michael had no idea. The quarterly shareholders' meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning at the downtown Marriott. As Michael had planned, it would include the formal announcement of my retirement, complete with the gold watch and obligatory standing ovation. What he didn't know was that I had plans of my own. In the 3 days leading up to the meeting, I continued my chauffeur duties while finalizing my strategy. The pieces were all in place: Westlake's audit findings, the union's legal challenge, and most importantly, the extensive evidence I'd gathered of Michael's intentions to dismantle everything Sullivan Logistics stood for. The morning of the meeting, I arrived at Michael's condo at the usual time, dressed not in my typical driver's clothes but in my best suit, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, Catherine's favorite. Michael raised an eyebrow when he saw me. Special occasion, he asked with a smirk. My retirement celebration, I replied evenly. Thought I should look the part. He seemed pleased by my apparent acceptance. Good. The board will appreciate the smooth transition. I've got a great speech prepared about your legacy. I'm sure it's moving, I said, holding the car door for him. At the hotel, Michael strode through the lobby with the confidence of a man who believed he'd won. I followed a few steps behind, another invisible service worker in a building full of them. But as we approached the ballroom where the meeting would be held, I noticed Michael falter slightly. James Westlake stood by the entrance, engaged in serious conversation with two board members. Eduardo Vasquez was there too, along with several other unexpected faces, longtime clients, suppliers, and company veterans who'd been pushed into early retirement in recent months. What are they doing here? Michael muttered, more to himself than to me. This is a shareholders' meeting. I stepped alongside him. About that. Did I mention I never consolidated all my shares into the family trust like you suggested? I maintained voting control. And I invited a few guests. The color drained from his face as understanding dawned. You can't do this. Actually, I can. And I have. I straightened my tie. Shall we go in? I believe they're waiting for us. The ballroom fell silent as we entered. Nearly 100 people were seated at round tables or standing in small groups. The tension was palpable. At the front of the room, a podium stood ready with the Sullivan Logistics logo displayed on a screen behind it. Michael grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in. Whatever you think you're doing, stop it now. You'll destroy everything. I gently removed his hand. No, son. I'm saving it. Before he could respond, the board chairman approached us. Frank, Michael. We should begin. There seems to be some confusion about today's agenda. No confusion, I said clearly. Just a slight adjustment. I made my way to the podium, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. For a moment, I saw Catherine sitting in the front row, giving me that small nod she always did before important negotiations. Steel and velvet, she'd called my boardroom demeanor. Good morning, I began. For those who don't know me, I'm Frank Sullivan. I founded this company 42 years ago with one truck and a loan from my father-in-law. Today, I'm here to talk about legacy, about values, and about the future of Sullivan Logistics. I paused, surveying the room. Michael stood frozen near the back, his face a mask of controlled panic. Recently, my son Michael informed me that I was too old to be useful to this company. That the board had voted unanimously for my retirement. that my new role would be as his driver while he modernized our operations. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. What you may not know is that this modernization includes outsourcing our warehouse operations to overseas facilities, laying off 43% of our American workforce, and systematically dismantling the relationships and quality standards that built this company's reputation. I clicked a button, and the screen behind me displayed emails, strategy documents, and financial projections, all bearing Michael's name or signature. This evidence was gathered during my time as Michael's chauffeur. It details plans that violate our contracts with major clients, breach our agreement with the workers' union, and fundamentally betray the principles this company was built on. The room erupted in shocked conversations. Michael started forward, but James Westlake stepped into his path, arms folded. I raised my hand for quiet. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because Sullivan Logistics means something to our employees, to our clients, and to Chicago. It stands for quality, reliability, and integrity. Values that aren't obsolete and never will be. I gestured to several folders on a side table. In those packets, you'll find a detailed analysis of how Michael's short-term cost-cutting would lead to long-term disaster. You'll also find my proposal for a leadership transition and strategic plan that preserves jobs, maintains our quality standards, and positions us for sustainable growth. Michael finally found his voice. This is absurd. The board already voted. Based on incomplete information, interrupted Barbara Chen, our longest-serving board member. She held up one of the packets, already marked with her notes. Frank, these offshore projections, they don't account for quality control issues or contractual penalties. Exactly, I nodded. Because they were never meant to be sustainable. They were designed to inflate short-term profits and executive bonuses while setting up the company for a quick sale before the consequences became apparent. The chairman cleared his throat. I think we need to reconsider our previous vote in light of this new information. All board members, please review these materials immediately. We'll reconvene in 1 hour for an emergency session. As people began examining the packets, Michael stormed toward me, fury in his eyes. You've been planning this all along. Using me. Recording me. Going behind my back. I met his gaze steadily. Yes. Just business, right? Nothing personal. He flinched at having his own words thrown back at him. You won't get away with this, he hissed. I'll fight you every step. You're welcome to try, I replied calmly. But before you do, you might want to check your email. The SEC is particularly interested in those conversations you had about falsifying compliance reports. His face went pale. You wouldn't. I protect what I build, Michael. I always have. You forgot that. As he stalked away, James approached me with an outstretched hand. Masterfully done, Frank. Remind me never to cross you. I shook his hand firmly. I learned long ago that respect is earned, not inherited. I thought I'd taught Michael the same lesson. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way, James said. What happens now? I gazed around the room at the animated discussions taking place, at decades of business relationships being reaffirmed. Now we rebuild. We innovate without abandoning our foundations. We grow without sacrificing what made us strong in the first place. By mid-afternoon, the board had unanimously rescinded their previous vote and accepted my transition plan. Michael was removed as CEO, pending a full investigation of his actions. I would return as interim CEO while we groomed new leadership not from outside consultants, but from the talented team members who understood our company's values. As the meeting adjourned, I found myself surrounded by employees, clients, and board members all expressing support and, in many cases, apologies for not seeing what was happening sooner. When the crowd finally dispersed, I stood alone in the emptying ballroom. The victory felt hollow in some ways. This wasn't how I'd imagined passing the torch to the next generation. In my dreams, Michael had stood beside me, ready to carry forward what we'd built together. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over." I didn't need to ask who it was from. I simply slipped the phone back into my pocket and straightened my shoulders. Michael was right about one thing: this wasn't over. But it wouldn't end the way he thought. Because while he'd seen an old man past his prime, what he'd failed to recognize was that age brings more than just wrinkles and gray hair. It brings wisdom, patience, and the absolute certainty that actions have consequences. I walked out of the hotel into the Chicago afternoon, not as a chauffeur, but as the man who had built Sullivan Logistics with his own two hands. And who had just saved it the same way. The aftermath of the shareholders' meeting unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Each movement revealed new dimensions of Michael's plans and, consequently, new aspects of my counter-strategy. Within 24 hours, Michael had hired high-powered attorneys and was threatening lawsuits for wrongful termination, defamation, and corporate espionage. His legal team issued bombastic press statements about illegal recordings and an elderly man's vindictive campaign against necessary modernization. I let them talk. The truth had a way of drowning out even the loudest protestations. By the following Monday, I was back in my old office, not because I wanted the trappings of power, but because Sullivan Logistics needed stability during the transition. The first order of business was damage control. I called an all-company meeting in our main warehouse. 300 employees gathered among the towering shelves and forklifts. Some had worked for me for decades, others had never met the founder personally. All looked uncertain about their futures. "You've heard rumors," I began, standing on a shipping pallet so everyone could see me. No podiums here, no PowerPoint presentations. Just straight talk. About overseas moves, about layoffs, about the direction of this company. I'm here to tell you directly, those plans are cancelled. The relief in the room was palpable, a collective exhalation. Sullivan Logistics was built by American workers serving American businesses. That's not changing on my watch or after it. We're going to grow, we're going to modernize, but we're going to do it right with you, not despite you. Eduardo Vasquez, standing near the front, gave me a subtle nod of approval. There will be changes, I continued. We need better technology. More efficient processes. New services for our clients. But we'll make those changes together, with transparency and mutual respect. After addressing the immediate concerns, I spent hours walking the warehouse floor, talking with drivers, dispatchers, and loading dock workers. I learned more about our operational challenges in those conversations than in any executive report Michael had commissioned. Back in the office that evening, I found Barbara Chen waiting for me. As our longest-serving board member and former CFO of a Fortune 500 company, her support had been crucial during the shareholder meeting. "The SEC called," she said without preamble. "They're formally investigating Michael's communications about falsifying compliance reports." I sank into my chair, suddenly feeling every one of my 63 years. That was fast. Turns out someone sent them quite a comprehensive file. Barbara raised an eyebrow. I wonder who that could have been. I neither confirmed nor denied. Some moves were best left unattributed. "The board is concerned about potential blowback," she continued. "This could get messy. Messier than outsourcing 300 American jobs overnight? Then breaching contracts with our major clients? Then destroying a 40-year reputation for integrity?" I shook my head. "I don't think so." Barbara studied me for a moment. "You know, when Michael first proposed transitioning you out, he painted a picture of a founder who couldn't let go, who was holding the company back with outdated ideas. The board believed him because, well, we've all seen it before. Founders who can't evolve. And now I think we were played." She leaned forward. "But Frank, at some point, there will need to be succession. A real one. I know. And there will be. I pulled out a folder from my desk drawer. This is the real transition plan. Not Michael's slash and burn approach, but a thoughtful evolution. I've identified 7 potential internal candidates for senior leadership. People who understand our culture but also bring fresh perspectives. Barbara skimmed the document, her expression shifting from skepticism to interest. This is actually impressive. You've been planning this for some time. Since Catherine died. I swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in my throat. She made me promise not to die at my desk. Said she'd haunt me if I didn't find the right people to carry on properly. A ghost of a smile touched Barbara's lips. She would have been proud of how you handled all this. Some of it, I conceded. Not the part where I failed so completely with our son. Barbara's expression softened. Parents can't control who their children become, Frank. Only who they themselves are. You showed everyone who you are this week. After she left, I sat alone in the growing darkness, thinking about Michael. Where had I gone wrong? Had I been too absorbed in the business, not present enough during his formative years? Had I inadvertently taught him that results mattered more than methods? My phone rang, interrupting my ruminations. The display showed Michael's name. Hello, Michael, I answered, keeping my voice neutral. The SEC, Dad? Really? His voice vibrated with barely controlled rage. You're willing to see your own son prosecuted? I'm willing to see anyone who planned to defraud our clients and destroy 300 families' livelihoods face appropriate consequences, I replied evenly. The fact that you're my son makes it more painful, not less necessary. You self-righteous old, he cut himself off. I heard him take a deep breath. When he spoke again, his tone had changed completely. Look, we both got carried away. Let's talk about this, figure out a compromise. We're family. The sudden shift to conciliation set off warning bells. Michael never backed down unless he saw a tactical advantage. What kind of compromise did you have in mind? I asked cautiously. Call off the SEC. Let me resign officially instead of being fired. I keep my equity stake, and in return, I'll stay quiet about how you obtained your evidence. And the offshore transitions? The layoffs? A pause. We can discuss modifications to the timeline. Not cancellations, modifications. Even now, he didn't understand the fundamental issue. Michael, this isn't about timelines or implementation strategies. It's about integrity. About keeping your word to people who depend on you. It's business, Dad, he exploded. Not a charity. Not a social experiment. A business exists to maximize profits for its shareholders. Who taught you that? I asked quietly. Because it certainly wasn't me. Oh, please. You built this company by being ruthless when necessary. I've heard the stories. Being tough in negotiations isn't the same as being without principles. I never lied to our employees about their futures. Never broke a contract for short-term gain. Never betrayed people who trusted me. The line went silent for several seconds. This conversation is pointless, Michael finally said. My lawyers will be in touch. I'm sure they will. I hesitated, then added, Son, it doesn't have to be this way. But he had already hung up. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. I worked with our leadership team to stabilize operations, reassure clients, and begin implementing the real modernization plan, one that embraced technology and efficiency without abandoning our core values. James Westlake not only renewed his contract but expanded it, bringing additional business our way. Other clients followed suit, relieved that the Sullivan logistics they trusted for years wasn't disappearing. Meanwhile, Michael's legal challenges faltered one by one. The recordings, while potentially problematic in a normal employment scenario, became admissible when fraud and SEC violations entered the picture. His attempts to paint me as a vindictive, cognitively declining old man fell apart under scrutiny, especially when I presented my detailed transition plan to the court. 6 weeks after the shareholder meeting, Michael appeared unannounced in my office doorway. He looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and less perfect hair. His bespoke suit hung slightly loose on his frame. "The SEC has offered a deal," he said without preamble. "No criminal charges if I cooperate fully, except a 5-year ban from officer positions in publicly traded companies, and pay a significant fine." I gestured for him to sit. He remained standing. "That sounds better than the alternative," I said carefully. "Does it?" His laugh was bitter. "My career is over, Dad. No company will touch me after this. My reputation is destroyed." "Was that your goal all along?" I stood up slowly, bracing my hands on the desk. "My goal was to save this company and the people who depend on it. Including you, though you may not believe that." "Save me?" He scoffed. "By humiliating me? By turning me into a corporate pariah?" "By stopping you before you crossed lines you couldn't come back from," I replied quietly. "The path you were on led to worse consequences than a 5-year ban and a fine. It led to becoming someone who values spreadsheets over people. Someone who breaks faith with those who trust you. Someone who—" I stopped, the words sticking in my throat. "Someone like what, Dad? Say it." His eyes blazed with challenge. "Someone I wouldn't recognize as the boy I raised." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "Take the deal, Michael," I said more gently. "Pay the fine. Serve the ban. Use the time to reflect on what really matters." He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "You know what the worst part is? For those 3 weeks, when I thought I was using you as my driver, when I thought I'd finally beaten you at your own game, I actually felt good about myself. Proud, even. What does that say about me?" Before I could answer, he was gone. That night, I sat on my back porch with a glass of bourbon, looking at old family photos on my tablet. Michael's 5th birthday, beaming with chocolate cake around his mouth. His high school graduation, arm slung around my shoulder. The day we opened our second warehouse, both of us in hard hats, cutting the ribbon together. Where had that eager, principled young man gone? And what part had I played in his transformation? Catherine would have known. She always saw the currents beneath the surface, especially with Michael. "He tries so hard to impress you," she told me once. "Sometimes I worry he thinks your love is conditional on his success." I dismissed her concern then. Of course, Michael knew I loved him unconditionally. Didn't he? But looking back at our interactions over the years, I saw a pattern. I'd praised his achievements, celebrated his victories, pushed him to excel, but had I ever made it clear that none of that affected my love for him? That he could fail 1,000 times, make countless mistakes, and still be my son, still be loved? I picked up my phone and scrolled to Michael's number. My thumb hovered over the call button, then retreated. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt in a day, or with a single conversation. This would take time. Instead, I texted, "The door is always open. When you're ready." No response came that night, or in the days that followed. Michael accepted the SEC deal, paid his fine, and according to mutual acquaintances, left Chicago for the West Coast. Life at Sullivan Logistics continued. I implemented the transition plan, promoting promising team members and gradually stepping back from day-to-day operations. We invested in new technology, expanded our services, and yes, even found efficiencies, but we did it without sacrificing jobs or quality. 6 months after the shareholder meeting, I officially retired, for real this time. No gold watch, no forced standing ovation, just a simple gathering with employees where I handed the reins to Janet Morris, our new CEO who had worked her way up from dispatcher 20 years earlier. "Don't screw it up," I told her with a wink as we shook hands. I'd hate to have to come out of retirement. She laughed. If I do, I promise not to make you my driver. My days settled into a new rhythm. I consulted occasionally when Janet asked for my input. I joined the boards of 2 local charities. I took a woodworking class at the community college, something Catherine had always encouraged me to do. And I thought about Michael. Often. Nearly a year to the day after he told me I was too old to be useful, my doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon. When I opened it, Michael stood on my porch, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain. He'd grown a beard. Dressed more casually than I'd seen him in years. But it was the look in his eyes that struck me most, clearer, steadier, without the driven intensity that had consumed him before. I got your text, he said. About the door being open. That was 11 months ago. He nodded. I wasn't ready then. We looked at each other for a long moment. Then I stepped aside, opening the door wider. Come in, I said. I just made coffee. Michael hesitated, then stepped across the threshold. Not into the home he'd grown up in, we'd moved several times as the business grew, but into a space that represented his family history nonetheless. In the kitchen, I poured 2 mugs of coffee and set them on the table. Michael glanced around, noting the subtle changes since his last visit. Catherine's Afghan now draped over my reading chair, her collection of ceramic birds arranged on a new shelf. How have you been? I asked as we sat down. Humbled, he answered honestly. Working at a small logistics company in Seattle. Not as CEO or VP, just a regular operations manager. Using a different last name so no one makes the connection. I absorbed this. And is it good work? It's honest work. He wrapped his hands around the mug. I'm learning the business again. From the ground up, like you always said I should. We sipped our coffee in silence for a few minutes. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, he finally said. Or for my old job back. Or even for money, though I'm sure that's what you might expect. Then why are you here, Michael? He met my eyes directly for the first time. To understand. To really understand where I went wrong. Not just with the business decisions, but with everything. The raw vulnerability in his voice took me back to when he was 8 years old, asking me to explain why his best friend had moved away without saying goodbye. That's not a simple conversation, I said carefully. I know. But I've spent a year thinking about it, and I still don't have the answers. He leaned forward. I was so sure I was right, Dad. So certain that I knew better than you, that the old ways were obsolete. When did I lose sight of what really mattered? It was the question I'd asked myself countless times over the past year. Maybe, I said slowly, we both lost sight of something important. His eyebrows rose in surprise. You forgot that business is ultimately about people, not just profits. And maybe I forgot that being your father was more important than being your boss. I set my mug down. I wonder sometimes if I put too much emphasis on you following in my footsteps, taking over the company. If I made you feel that was the only way to earn my approval. Michael looked away, blinking rapidly. I wanted to make you proud. I was always proud of you, son. From the day you were born. My voice roughened. I just didn't say it enough. Didn't make it clear that my pride wasn't tied to your achievements or position. I thought beating you at your own game would finally prove I was worthy, he admitted quietly. That I wasn't just the founder's son who got handed everything. And I thought protecting the company from your plans was the only way to preserve my legacy, I countered. We were both wrong. Michael nodded slowly. So where does that leave us? I considered the question carefully. Not just as a father looking at his son, but as a man looking at another man who had made serious mistakes but seemed genuinely changed by them. At the beginning of a new road, I finally said. Not the one either of us expected to travel, but maybe one we both need. He nodded again, more firmly this time. I'd like that. We talked for hours that afternoon, really talked, in ways we hadn't in years. About the business, yes, but also about Catherine, about Michael's childhood, about the pressures he'd felt and the mistakes I'd made. About his life in Seattle and his gradual understanding of what Sullivan Logistics had really been built on. As evening approached, Michael stood to leave. I should get back to my hotel. Flight to Seattle tomorrow morning. I walked into the door. How long are you in town? Just the weekend. I used my vacation days. He hesitated. But I could come back. For Christmas maybe, if that would be okay. More than okay, I said. This is still your home, Michael. Always will be. He nodded, emotion making words difficult. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped forward and embraced me, awkwardly at first, then with genuine feeling. I held my son close, realizing it had been years since we'd shared more than a perfunctory handshake. Drive safely, I said as he headed down the front steps. He turned back with the ghost of a smile. I learned from the best. As I watched his car disappear down the street, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time: hope. Not the satisfaction of a well-executed business strategy or the triumph of outwitting an opponent, but simple hope for a relationship that might, against all odds, find its way toward healing. Michael and I still had a long road ahead. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight. But we had taken the first step together, and for now, that was enough. I closed the door and returned to my living room, where a photograph of Catherine sat on the mantel. You were right, I told her image quietly. As usual. In the stillness of the house, I could almost hear her reply, of course I was. Now don't waste any more time, old man. I smiled. Even from beyond, she was still guiding us home. In the months that followed Michael's visit, our relationship began to rebuild, not quickly or easily, but with deliberate care on both sides. Our conversations, initially cautious and limited to safe topics, gradually expanded to include more meaningful exchanges. Michael kept his word about Christmas, arriving with thoughtful gifts and a willingness to engage with the extended family members who viewed him with varying degrees of wariness. He weathered their cold shoulders and pointed remarks with a humility that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Uncle Frank, my niece Amanda said when she cornered me in the kitchen, "Are you sure about this?" After what he did? I was slicing ham for sandwiches, a task Catherine had always handled at family gatherings. I'm sure about giving my son a second chance. He tried to destroy everything you built. Her loyalty was touching, if misplaced. And he's paying for that, I replied evenly. The question is whether the payment needs to be eternal. Amanda wasn't convinced, but she respected me enough to keep further comments to herself. Similar scenes played out with other relatives throughout the day, and through it all, Michael maintained his composure, neither defending himself aggressively nor retreating into resentful silence. Late that night, after everyone had left, we sat in front of the fireplace with glasses of bourbon. The Christmas tree lights cast soft shadows across the room. That wasn't easy, I acknowledged. Thank you for coming anyway. Michael swirled the amber liquid in his glass. They have every right to be angry. I betrayed the family name. Names can be rebuilt. He glanced at me. Is that what you're doing with Sullivan Logistics? Rebuilding? I nodded. Janet's doing well. She has her own vision, but she respects the foundation. Do you miss it? He asked. Being at the helm? I considered the question honestly. Sometimes. But not as much as I expected to. There's a freedom in letting go that I never anticipated. I'm learning that too, Michael said quietly. In Seattle, I'm just another employee. My ideas have to stand on their merit, not my position. It's clarifying. As winter turned to spring, our communications became more regular. Weekly phone calls. Occasional visits when Michael could get away from Seattle. He never asked about returning to Sullivan Logistics, and I never offered. That door, we both tacitly understood, had closed. During one of his visits in April, we took a drive to the site of our first warehouse, now a trendy shopping center in a revitalized industrial district. I remember coming here after school, Michael said as we sat in the car, looking at the transformed space. You'd let me help count inventory if I finished my homework. You were good at it too. Meticulous. Caught errors the regular staff missed. He smiled at the memory. Mom would bring dinner sometimes. The three of us would eat at that wobbly card table in your office. She insisted on real plates, even there, I recalled. No paper or plastic. Said just because we were eating in a warehouse didn't mean we had to be uncivilized. Michael laughed. She was right. As usual. The ease between us in that moment felt like a gift, fragile but genuine. Later that evening, over dinner at my house, Michael broached a subject we'd both been avoiding. I've been offered a position, he said, setting down his fork. Regional Operations Director for a mid-sized logistics company in Phoenix. My heart skipped. That's a big step up from your current role. He nodded. They don't know about my SEC situation. Different industry segment, so they haven't connected the dots. And you're considering it? I am. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. But I wanted to talk to you first. About disclosure. I understood immediately. You're wondering if you should tell them about your history. Yes. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage years that it momentarily transported me back 2 decades. The ban doesn't technically apply to this position since they're privately held. But ethically. The fact that he was wrestling with the question rather than simply taking the path of least resistance told me more about his growth than any words could have. What are you thinking? I asked instead of offering immediate advice. I'm thinking I don't want to build anything else on a foundation of deception, he said slowly. Even if it costs me this opportunity. Pride, real pride, not the shallow satisfaction of seeing my name carried forward, surged through me. Then I think you have your answer. He nodded, looking both relieved and apprehensive. I'll tell them tomorrow. I raised my glass. To integrity. Better learned late than never. To my surprise, the Phoenix company hired Michael despite his disclosure, albeit with additional oversight provisions and a probationary period. His experience and skills, combined with his forthright acknowledgement of past mistakes, had ultimately worked in his favor. My new boss said something interesting, Michael told me on the phone after accepting the position. He said everyone deserves a shot at redemption, but not everyone is willing to do the hard work it requires. Sounds like a wise man, I replied. When do you start? Next month. I'll be moving the week after next. Phoenix was farther than Seattle, but somehow it felt like Michael was moving closer rather than further away. Perhaps because each step he took now seemed to be in a direction we both understood and respected. The summer brought an unexpected development. Janet Morris, now comfortably established as CEO of Sullivan Logistics, invited me to lunch at one of Catherine's favorite restaurants. We've been approached about an acquisition, she said after we'd ordered. Pretty serious interest from Transcontinental Shipping. I nodded, unsurprised. Sullivan Logistics had flourished under Janet's leadership, making it an attractive target. And what do you think? I think they're offering a very fair price. I think our shareholders would be pleased. I think our core operations and jobs would be protected under the terms they're proposing. She took a sip of water. But I also think you built this company, and you deserve to have input on its future. I appreciated her consideration, but the truth was, I'd been preparing for this moment since I stepped down. The company isn't mine anymore, Janet. It belongs to its shareholders, its employees, and its leadership. If you believe this is the right move, I trust your judgment. She studied me for a moment. You really have let go, haven't you? Had to eventually, I smiled. What would Catherine say if I was still meddling at this point? Janet laughed. She'd drag you out by your ear. The acquisition proceeded smoothly over the next few months. I attended the final shareholder meeting where the deal was approved, accepting congratulations and well wishes from people who still associated the Sullivan name with the company. It was a bittersweet moment, watching my life's work officially pass into new hands, but the melancholy was tempered by pride in what we'd built and how it was being preserved. I called Michael that evening to tell him the news. How do you feel about it? He asked. At peace, I answered truthfully. It's the right time, the right deal. Janet negotiated excellent terms for the employees. And the Sullivan name? Will continue for the foreseeable future as a division of Transcontinental. I paused. How do you feel about it? He was quiet for a moment. Like watching the family home being sold, I guess. Sad, but right, somehow. Like things are as they should be. His response reflected my own feelings so precisely that I found myself smiling. How's Phoenix? Hot, he chuckled. But good. The team is solid. Lot of potential. And they treat you well? Even knowing your history? They watch me closely, he acknowledged. But fairly. I've earned trust step by step. Just as he was doing with me, I thought but didn't say. As fall approached, bringing with it the anniversary of Michael's "You're too old to be useful" declaration, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 2 years. From founder to chauffeur to savior to retiree. From estranged father to whatever Michael and I were gradually becoming. Not quite friends yet, but something more honest than we'd been before. I decided to mark the occasion in a way that would acknowledge the past while looking toward the future. I called Michael with an invitation. I'm thinking of taking a road trip, I said. Chicago to Phoenix. The scenic route. Thought you might like a co-pilot for the final leg. His surprise was evident even over the phone. You're driving to Phoenix? At your age? I laughed. Still too old to be useful? That's not what he began, then caught the teasing in my voice. Very funny, Dad. But seriously, that's a long drive. I've got nothing but time these days. And I've always wanted to see the Grand Canyon. We arranged to meet in Flagstaff. I would drive the first part of the journey alone, and Michael would fly up from Phoenix to join me for the last day on the road, including a detour to the Grand Canyon. The solo portion of my trip was peaceful, meditative. I listened to audiobooks Catherine had always recommended, but I'd been too busy to read. I stopped at roadside diners where truckers, some who'd worked with Sullivan Logistics over the years, shared stories and coffee. I took my time, savoring the freedom of movement without deadline or destination pressure. Michael was waiting at the agreed hotel in Flagstaff when I arrived. He looked well tanned from the Arizona sun, more relaxed in his bearing than I'd seen him in years. Nice wheels, he commented, eyeing the midnight blue Mustang convertible I'd rented for the trip. Thought I'd try something different than a Bentley, I replied with a wink. The next morning, we set out early for the Grand Canyon. Michael drove, and I navigated, our roles reversed from that fateful period as chauffeur and passenger. The symmetry wasn't lost on either of us. Standing at the rim of the canyon later that morning, gazing out at the vast, ancient landscape, I felt a profound sense of perspective. What were our human dramas compared to this timeless expanse? Yet those dramas mattered because they were ours, our mistakes, our growth, our reconciliations. Worth the drive? Michael asked, coming to stand beside me. Worth everything, I replied, meaning far more than just the journey to this place. As we continued toward Phoenix that afternoon, the conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years. We talked about Michael's work, about my newfound hobby of woodworking, about mutual acquaintances and family members. Normal father-son topics, unmarked by the tension that had previously defined our interactions. "I've been thinking," Michael said as we approached the outskirts of Phoenix, "about starting something new eventually. Not right away, I still have a lot to prove and learn at my current position. But someday." "What kind of something?" I asked, curious. "A logistics consulting firm focused on sustainability. Helping companies balance efficiency with environmental responsibility and ethical labor practices." He glanced at me. "Kind of a blend of your values and some of my ideas about modernization." The concept struck me as both sound and symbolic, a potential synthesis of our different perspectives, transformed into something constructive. "I think that has real potential," I said sincerely. "The industry needs more of that kind of thinking." He nodded, eyes back on the road. "It's just an idea for now. But I wanted you to know that I'm thinking long-term again. Not just about survival or redemption, but about building something worthwhile." "I'm glad to hear that." I hesitated, then added, "And when you're ready, if you want my input, not control, just perspective, I'd be honored to provide it." Michael's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "I'd appreciate that," he said, his voice not quite steady. We drove in comfortable silence for several miles. "You know," he said eventually, "when I told you that you were too old to be useful, it was never really about your age." "I know," I replied. "It was about power, control, and insecurity," he admitted. "I was terrified of not measuring up to you, of failing with what you'd built. So I convinced myself that your way was obsolete so I wouldn't have to live up to it." The honesty of his self-assessment moved me. "We all have our methods of self-protection, son." "What's yours?" he asked, glancing over with genuine curiosity. I considered the question. "Work." I buried myself in it whenever I felt vulnerable. After your mother died, it was all I had left that made sense. "I did the same thing," Michael acknowledged. "Just more destructively." As Phoenix came into view on the horizon, the sun setting behind the mountains created a spectacular backdrop of gold and crimson. We were nearly at the end of our journey, this particular journey, at least. "Dad," Michael said as we exited the highway, "do you think we'll ever get back to where we were? Before all this happened?" "No," I answered honestly. "But I think we might get somewhere better. Somewhere more authentic." He nodded slowly. "I'd like that." Michael's apartment was in a modern complex near the center of the city. As we pulled into the visitor parking, I felt a surprising reluctance for the day to end. "Stay for dinner," he offered, seeming to share the sentiment. "I've gotten pretty good at cooking for myself this past year." "I'd like that," I echoed his earlier words. His apartment was modestly furnished but tasteful, with hints of Catherine's influence in the arrangement of books and the presence of actual artwork on the walls. On a side table stood a framed photograph I recognized immediately, the three of us at Michael's college graduation, arms around each other, beaming with shared pride and joy. "That was a good day," I said, nodding toward the photo. "One of the best," he agreed. Before I started trying to impress the world instead of just being grateful for what I had. As we prepared dinner together, Michael cooking, me handling the salad and setting the table, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. Not because everything was perfect or because all wounds were healed, but because we were both, finally, moving in the right direction. Over dinner, Michael hesitantly brought up a topic we'd both avoided. "I've been thinking about coming back to Chicago. Not right away, but maybe in a year or two, once I've established myself here. Would you be okay with that?" The question held layers of meaning beyond the literal words. Would I be comfortable with his proximity? Would I trust his motivations? Would I welcome the chance for a closer relationship? "I'd like having you closer," I said simply. "This is still your home too, Michael." His relief was visible. "Thank you." As I prepared to leave the next day, returning the rental car and flying back to Chicago, Michael walked me to the parking lot. "This was good," he said. "Really good." It was. I put my hand on his shoulder. "We should do it again. Maybe next time you can come fishing with me in Wisconsin." He grinned. "Still using that old cabin on Lake Geneva?" "Some things don't need modernizing," I replied with a smile. We embraced, no longer awkwardly, but with genuine affection. As I pulled away, I saw in his eyes not the calculating executive who had demoted me to chauffeur, but glimpses of both the boy he had been and the man he was becoming. "Drive safely, Dad," he said as I got into the car. "Always do," I replied. "Call when you get a chance." "I will." As I drove away, I caught a final glimpse of him in the rearview mirror, standing tall, watching me go. Not with resentment or calculation, but with something that looked very much like respect. 2 years earlier, my son had told me I was too old to be useful and made me his driver. I had smiled and accepted the role, knowing it was just the beginning of a longer journey. Now, after detours neither of us could have anticipated, we were finding our way back to each other, not as founder and successor, not as victor and vanquished, but simply as father and son. The road ahead would have its bumps and turns, no doubt. True reconciliation is never a straight path. But for the first time in years, I was confident we were both traveling in the right direction. And that, I reflected as Phoenix receded behind me, was more useful than any business title or corporate triumph could ever be. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.